There is an external assumption and an internal assumption that motherhood is going to make you less of a career-driven woman, less sharp, less efficient, less ambitious, and probably less effective at your job. If anything, it has made me better in all of those things. When he did arrive, all I could think of was, this is why it didn't work all those times. It was always him. So I now am led a little bit more by what are the small yays each day? And if they're not there, then really nothing is worth it. So that sees the yay for me.
Sarah Davidson, welcome back to the Stella Podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It is such a pleasure to be back.
The last time you and I sat down in this environment on the Stella Podcast was halfway through 2023. And Sarah, you gave me and our audience the immense privilege of opening up for the first time about your experience of pregnancy loss. At that stage, you and your husband, Nick, were attempting to start a family. And what really stood out for me was you were in the middle of that moment. As you said, there was no quote unquote happy ending as you were talking. Sarah, in the almost 2.5 years since we last spoke, how has life changed, and how is the woman that I'm speaking to today different and in some ways similar to the woman that I spoke to then?
Oh my gosh. Wow. What a question, Sarah. You always ask the most incredible, thought-provoking and reflective questions. And it feels like such a privilege to be back because you really have held me through quite a lot of momentous moments in my life. And I think the great privilege of podcasting and journalism is you do get yourself in a time capsule to reflect on. So I do look back at that time and think I wouldn't even know what to say to her to describe the immeasurable joy that lies on the other side of parenthood. It's almost like I've been given a ticket to this incredibly indescribable planet that all the parents live on and it's like an enhanced sense of emotion. It's an identity that you never even knew was possible. I don't even still have words to express how much my world has changed and how much I have changed as a person, and definitely for the better. I thought that I had done a lot of growth. I thought that I'd lived a really wonderful life and that I'd experienced a really full spectrum of what it means to be a human. And it was less than 5% of what I have since seen is the true privilege of being Teddy's mum. It's been everything I hoped and more.
If we were to touch upon then that other 95%, I know this is, again, another really big question to throw at you, but what are some of the biggest aspects or the biggest changes that this new chapter of your life has brought about, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I've always been a very affectionate, loving person and felt what I think is quite deeply, perhaps on the spectrum of relative human emotion. But it has cracked me open in a way that I never knew. The attachment that I feel to Teddy, but then by extension to Nick being his father, and that we created this magical person together, but then also every other parent who I see out there, every other child, I see young Teddy in every adult. Also, I'm like, you're someone's Teddy. It's changed the way that I think of people and our life experience. It's made me immeasurably more patient, which was not a strength, I think, that I had before. It's also given me a stamina that I didn't know that I had, a time efficiency. I really do think I thought I was a good time manager beforehand. And I cannot believe what mothers, especially working mothers and working parents, have been surviving on all this time, squeezing in everything into the 25 seconds of full attention that you can actually give your work per day. The juggle has been probably the biggest shift.
It's so true. You mentioned patience, and I think of all the things that get tested, apart from the things that I think a lot of people know about, the sleep deprivation and all of just the physical toll that it can take if you have the privilege to bring a baby into this world, is your patience getting tested and your time management skills getting tested like never before.
It's been unbelievable. I just have been shocked by how much I can squeeze into such a small amount of time and such a small amount of energy, because before when I would use the words tired and busy, I just really didn't know what my mum friends were experiencing. But it's also been interesting because your priorities shift so dramatically as well. So things I thought I would care a lot about have just fallen into oblivion. And even my desire to travel, my desire to take risks has really adjusted quite rapidly, which I didn't necessarily expect. I've always been uh, probably had quite a healthy appetite for risk. And suddenly, because Teddy's involved in that risk matrix, I've become a lot more maybe measured, I think, in how I decide things for the future. But I almost don't recognize the person I was before, even though it hasn't been that long. I can't remember my life without him. And I just love every minute of the chaos.
I wanted to also then talk about the empathy that I know you have navigated this privilege in this chapter of your life with, because as you just touched upon there, Sarah, so beautifully, there's so much joy and blissful chaos in this part of your life. And then to go back to our first conversation in 2023, when that was something that you were on the other side of and were struggling with, well, will that ever be something that is part of my experience on this earth, is becoming a mother and giving birth to a baby. And then, as I said, you were part of the Stella Mother's Day issue last year. Now, to our audience, I'm not here to talk about Stella, but it is, I think, important context for things that I'd love to ask Sarah to touch upon here, is that we celebrated Mother's Day last year with a group issue. And Sarah, you were one of a few high-profile Australian women that were featured on. And we told the whole gamut of stories of motherhood. Your own story, of course, being a new mother. Teddy was only a couple of months old at that time. And then, of course, yeah, so the joy and, as I say, the blissful chaos of new motherhood and first-time motherhood, but also with that complexity of that story of pregnancy loss behind it. And then as part of that story, we had, people that were talking about not wanting to have children, people that had, multi-generational families, so single mothers being, supported by grandparents. And then, of course, we had somebody talking to, being a motherless daughter, which is also like part of my lived experience. So it was a lot of the different paths of motherhood. And Sarah, it was lovely that you agreed to be part of that issue because, as I say, it really spoke to you wanting to share your joy with the world with real empathy and being so acutely aware that there would be people looking at that image, that beautiful image of you and Teddy thinking, I want that. Am I ever going to have that? So can I ask you about this other side of your experience through the lens of becoming a mother almost 2 years on?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think from the outset, I had always had such a deep exposure, I think lifelong exposure to how challenging it can be to become a mother and how much that can tear your hopes and dreams and identity apart. My own mum did IVF for nearly 10 years and struggled a lot in her journey to conceive us, which actually never happened naturally. As you know, I was adopted. And so from the beginning, I had seen the many different kinds of ways people get there or sometimes not get there. And by contrast, my aunties, who are my second mothers and the closest people who are solely responsible for huge parts of my personality, chose not to be mothers and have still played a huge role in my village. And then what I thought would be a big quantum shift, having a biological child as an adoptee, also wasn't as fundamentally huge as I thought it would be. It's almost like, yes, I birthed him, but that also kind of hasn't really mattered that much. It was a beautiful experience, but people ask, was it this huge, your first blood relative? And what did your mum think of that? I don't really see Teddy and I as any different to mum and I, even though we have now shared that whole experience together. So the big thing I think of when I look back at me when I last spoke to you, and this is easy to say on the other side, and that's why I didn't want to do that first interview now with the happy ending, is when he did arrive, all I could think of was this is why it didn't work all those times. It was always him. And I think a lot of people who have a really difficult journey and a long journey, when their child does make it their way to you. And mum was exactly the same. She's like, it never worked because you were the daughter I was meant to have. And I felt that way about Teddy. So it's the hardest thing anyone will ever tell you. But the universe has a funny way about the timing it works out for when things are supposed to happen. And I still believe that now. And I know that that's not very tangible for anyone who is on that journey, but there's something about trusting timing.
I think it's such a good point, Sarah, and it transcends any one particular experience of life, including parenting. I'm not sure if you agree with that. Is that it's what we often refer to as those sliding doors moments, that you go for that job you really want to get and then you don't get it, and it can be heartbreaking. And 6 months or a year later, maybe a week later, you find yourself in quote unquote your dream job, and you think, thank God I didn't get that job, or the one that got away, when it comes to romance and relationships. I think everyone's had that moment where in hindsight they've thought, gosh, that was extremely difficult, often profoundly heartbreaking when you're talking about things like trying to conceive a baby. But as you say, the universe sometimes really does know what it was doing all along.
Absolutely. And I also must take my hat off to the women who were featured in that issue, who did face a lot of scrutiny for perhaps choosing not to be mothers, and people wondering how did that relate to Mother's Day. But I think that really also validated the feelings a lot of women have. It's what I the biggest lesson I've learned about humans is we are all wired so differently. And whatever we are chasing, whether it's success, joy, happiness, fulfillment, whatever our metrics are, we will all satisfy those things in such different ways. But so many of us don't allow ourselves permission to do that. And it's the same with parenting. There are so many people out there I know who have chosen not to be parents, but they give their love and attention and everything they have to offer to their nieces and nephews, to their friends' children. And when they say it takes a village, that's who they mean. They mean the full spectrum of relatives and friends. So I really liked that you gave visibility to the very different ways people choose to live their lives. And not everyone wants to be a parent. And some people desperately do. But I think it's in any situation so important to allow everyone to make their own decisions about their life and then be happy with that.
Absolutely. And it's also like, Sarah, when you were talking earlier about how people with absolute good intentions were saying, oh, was the experience of you giving birth to Teddy different to your experience and the experience of your mum of being adopted? And as you say, it wasn't. It's that old sort of, cliche about, blood being thicker than water. No, like it's not like that at all. It's the relationship between a parent and child is second to none, whatever circumstances it comes about. And as I say, of course, those comments were well-meaning, but they also belie a certain assumption, don't they, that all of us still have clearly as a society, that there's still sort of one way to do this stuff.
Yeah.
And that's okay, but there's still the main one. Even people that would consider themselves to be quite enlightened, I think all of us can fall into that trap.
Yeah, and I think one of the messages that ties in with that increased patience that I've sort of developed through this process of motherhood is being really patient with people's curiosity. Because I also think, especially if it is a really well-intentioned question, it does come from a place of unfamiliarity. The best thing you can do, I think it's easy to become quite defensive or offended or to close off. And of course, you have every right. It's your personal life. You can choose to respond to strangers however you wish. But I think of every interaction like that as a huge learning opportunity. That is a huge opportunity to explain to someone. It's probably something they've never seen before, to welcome them into your world. And it does take a little bit of patience to reply to all the questions. But I always think this might be the first time they've seen something like this. And if I could really gently explain what it did feel like, they might walk away a little bit more enlightened. And I also might feel like I've represented a different pathway in an educational way. I do think we get offended quite easily for people who put a lot of our personal lives online. Like, what do you expect if you're sharing everything that you do to have some curiosity?
Sarah, you talk about how your priorities have changed a lot since Teddy was born, but you're obviously still very driven, still working. I mean, even saying that sounds ridiculous. Still working. I mean, what's the flip side of that? Okay, so you've packed up and,
Yeah.
just doing hashtag tradwife. No. So, but of course, there is, of course, just the reality of so many hours in the day. How's that side of things playing out for you from a logistic perspective for you and Nick juggling, career and work with a young child, but also in terms of priorities, are you still as ambitious and driven as ever when it comes to work?
That is a question I've loved reflecting on, particularly now that we're out of that initial newborn phase where you are kind of sorting out what your reaction is. It's really hard. It's so hazy. There's so many emotions. And I really did think that I would struggle a lot more than I have with my identity. I thought as an ambitious, career driven woman that I would find it really difficult to step back from that level of productivity and freedom of my time. And in fact, I kind of went the flip in the opposite direction. In the early days, I was like, I just want to do this all day. I never want to work again. I just want to be a stay at home mum and look at this miracle that I created and play with him all day long. I've kind of gone, all over the place and in a roller coaster of directions in that interaction between ambition versus the slowing down. And I've loved everything it's done to me. It's softened me. It's made me more patient with my goals. It's made me a lot more relaxed about urgency. It's done all those beautiful things in my career. But at the same time, and I've loved having conversations with similar women to me recently, particularly Michelle Battersby, there is an external assumption and an internal assumption that motherhood is going to make you less of a career driven woman, less sharp, less efficient, less ambitious, and probably less effective at your job. If anything, it has made me better in all of those things. I'm much more efficient. I'm way better at prioritizing. I'm more direct because you don't have time to think about anything else. I agonize so much less about decisions before I make them because I'm a lot clearer on who I am. And there's a confidence as well in I birthed a human, I grew organs. So, you don't underestimate me. But I think it gives you this power that you didn't have before that I didn't expect. I really did think that I would lose my way a little bit. And of course, emotionally, I haven't felt the loss of identity. Logistically, I definitely have had some really hard patches during sleep regressions, sleep deprivation. My confidence and clarity in those moments took a big whack because you're just so tired. You can't figure out who you are. And our industry is very interesting in that, probably more so than others, there's a big relevance piece around getting your face out there in the media. You sort of have to be in people's, at the forefront of their minds. You have to create your own momentum because we work for ourselves. And that has been a little bit difficult on the days where I did want to sort of slow down and not have the stability of maternity leave to fall back on. But overall, I have loved being a working mum. I think working mothers are extraordinary, superior beings and incredibly powerful. I've said a lot in the last couple of months that now that haze of the first year has kind of calmed down, I have this new chapter energy brewing in me that is going to create something that I'm not quite sure what it is. And normally, when I agitate for change, the new chapter is kind of immediately apparent. So, again, that patience while I sit with it. But even in the last 6 months, my creativity has come back with a vengeance. And I've done things I never thought that I would be able to do. So, I'm sugarcoating it a lot. There have been some extremely difficult moments. And I try and also share that on social media and on all my platforms and share the breakdowns and the mess. And anytime that there is glam, I try and show the absolute carnage that our house is before it. But overall, it has been a transformative, extraordinary learning curve.
Sarah, you obviously, as part of your job, you MC a lot of events. You do go out. You're always looking, $1 billion when you're posting like a get ready with me or an image. Do you get some of that commentary yourself, as in, oh, like, where's Teddy? Or, oh, you're going out a lot. Or even just things like, oh, I wish I could go out, but I didn't get to go out for until they were in high school.
it's I feel very, very lucky that I have a very compassionate, kind audience. I don't think I've ever had a troll in 10 to 15 years of sharing the behind the scenes of my life. But I had a very interesting conversation with someone the other day about this. And a lot of that is by design. It is by choosing, and I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to talk about this actually, because I don't think I've talked about it much. It is a very conscious choice to be a vanilla figure in the landscape in which I operate. There are so many causes and issues. I'm very politically engaged. I am highly opinionated on so many different things. And a lot of my background has been in foreign policy and international relations. I never speak about things like that on my platform because I have chosen from the beginning to be somewhere where people's heart rates don't go up unless it's with joy. I've always chosen to be a safe space, and it is at the cost of a lot of meaningful debate or meaningful contribution to issues that I would love to lend my voice to. But I think we all decide what our role is in the landscape and what how far we will go into controversy or conflict versus not. And firstly, I had a business and then I had a brand that's very joy focused. And I really want to be a pleasurable place for people to be. I want my content to make you smile. I want it to be thoughtless and easy. And I want the same for me because my tolerance for conflict is very low. I absolutely lose my mind if people don't like me. And I think that that's been something that has allowed me to kind of avoid a lot of controversy over the years by cultivating an audience who knows what to expect from me. And then I feel like in return, I can kind of know what to expect from them, which is if there is ever feedback, it's delivered so kindly and respectfully. And I know I'm in the minority in that situation. But it also does mean that there are many times I think I really want to share this, but it's just not going to be worth it for me. We all have a different line that we draw, and I'm so comfortable with the line that I've drawn.
That community that you have curated, like Troll Free, is very near to being unprecedented. And you've just explained so carefully there, Sarah, exactly how you have created that community. Do you think, if I ask you to put your business hat on in terms of scaling up, are there lessons from there, apart, of course, as you've said, certain content and polarizing issues that you won't touch upon? That's been a conscious decision from the start. But in terms of that tone that you clearly have fostered among your followers and your audience, is there something there that you think can be extrapolated more generally across the national dialogue and the way that people are engaging in social? Because obviously it's not an original thought for me to say it's a bit of a cesspit out there.
Yes. I mean, I think I am also very lucky because even if you do make a really conscious decision to draw within the lines, of course you can't stop. If your page is on public, you can't stop whoever coming to engage with your content. So I just happen to have avoided being in the sights and target of, some of the more vocal, interesting characters out there. But I do think that you can set an intention from the beginning. And I think because a lot of people's profiles have grown by accident, perhaps they've never thought about it. They have never really thought about what their role is. And it's only because I've been very clear on it that I've been able to stick with that. But it does always surprise me when some people are surprised by the response they get. I'm like, what content you just posted and you knew that was going to engender a particular reaction in people. But overall, I do think if you speak to people like they are people, it's really easy to forget that your followers are just the same people that you meet on the street. If you speak to them the same way you would a room of strangers on the street, you'll get the same reactions that you would probably get from a room of people on the street in real life. So if you approach them like they're not silly, you take them along on the ride, you're very patient. Even if I do share something that's a little bit controversial, like anything in the area of breastfeeding versus formula, and they're moderately controversial topics, I would really preface it with, There is no judgment here, each to their own. I was a formula fed baby. My child is exclusively breastfed. I sit on both sides of the fence. I'm just sharing neutral information here in case it's useful. Like if you kind of take people through instead of trying to shove something down their throat, they feel like they receive the information with that level of emotion as well. And then it's more likely to get you a nice response. So I do think you can sit and set a tone for yourself consciously, and then that helps you get that same level of emotion back. But there's a lot you can't control as well. It's wild out there.
Sarah, I'd love to talk to you about your podcast, Seize the Yay. We've spoken about that before, but at the moment, I believe that you're working, I don't know if this is part of this new chapter energy that you spoke about, with the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, including the first female Director General. Now, I mean, I'm just saying this, I'm assuming there's only certain things you can say because, we're talking about like national security, all of those things. So we talk like this conversation might, self-destruct in 2 minutes. So whatever you're allowed to say, I'd love to hear that because I know that you had interest early on, didn't you? Because your career's been so fascinating. But one of the many paths that you had explored at one point was possibly working in intelligence and security.
Yes, absolutely. And it is always fascinating to me the way that certain interests will make their way back into your life, even if not in the originally planned fashion. They sometimes just rear their heads later in life. And this was the same. It wasn't something I was pursuing. As you know, the podcast is all about showing the many different pathways that we all have on the way to a joyful life and really trying to showcase how differently people end up in the places they end up. We're not all meant to be founders. We're not all meant to be in the media. We're meant to have different roles. And interviewing a spy is something I would have never even dreamed of doing. So I'd never actually tried, but I was actually approached by both of our incredible Australian intelligence agencies. And for some reason, given very exclusive access to current intelligence officers to help tell the story of what they do. And for so long, I think these organizations have been shrouded in secrecy, obviously to protect operational security, but it allows Australians to live in blissful ignorance. And so many people don't even know what they do, or that they exist. But we are entering an age where we also need to recruit really incredible people to these organizations, I think. And that's been part of the impetus for being a little bit more open. And so I was given the extraordinary opportunity to interview the Director General of the Australian Secret Intelligence Services. She is basically M from Mission Impossible, although she's referred to as something else. She's an extraordinary woman, the first female in the role, and I mean, heads up our most secret organization, our spies who are all placed overseas. It's a foreign intelligence service. The spies that you kind of hear of who are placed in embassies overseas, this is the kind of work that she is doing. I mean, she writes only in a purple pen. She is just one of the coolest women I've ever met. And then she invited me for the first time ever to a top secret training facility in an undisclosed location to conduct further interviews with spies there.
This might be a dumb question, but do you know why she only writes in a purple pen?
So that you know when something is signed by her. All the heads of intelligence agencies write in different colors so that you know when something is signed by her that it was truly by her hand.
How fascinating. And Sarah, we hear a lot of people in the pop culture world talk about the James Bond movies and when are we going to have a female Bond? A more pertinent question might be when are we having more real life people that James Bond is working to that also happen to be women? Sounds like in Australia that might be happening a bit more often than we think it is.
Absolutely. And one of the most exciting things for me was not only to be able to shine a light on the most senior person in this organization being a woman, but also being a mother. And then the two very experienced, long serving, incredibly badass spies that I got to interview were also both women. And I think that was a surprise to me. It's not what I was expecting. Also, hearing some of the training that they go through and the amazing things these women are capable of, that they are women, and one of them is also a mother of three. That to me was not what I was expecting. And in fact, none of the people I have met through these agencies are what you would expect. We have this, as you mentioned, Hollywood influenced perception of what a spy is going to be like, this cold lone wolf who's rogue and out on the streets and, you know, mildly socially awkward. But if anything, the more normal a spy is, the more disarming they are. And you'd be surprised by all of the people that I met. They are so normal and so warm and so personable, which is a great strength. I mean, think about the crowds they must operate in. They have to blend in. And so they're just normal people with normal lives and very, very broad skill sets and backgrounds. That's the other thing. I thought that they'd all have followed, you know, international relations law degrees, like where I sort of came from. And they've all come from all over, very, very different personalities, different ages, different backgrounds. It's been such an extraordinary, accidental, transformative development in CCA, but the greatest privilege to be given. I have security clearance. Like, talk about, I always talk to people about how you never know where life will take you. And perhaps this is my big next chapter energy. I mean, one of the other things I've been doing is producing shows. I've kind of taken on a bit of a media production role in helping other podcasts get off the ground. And I've been producing the Archive podcast with Rosalia Russian and Lana Wilkinson. And back to back, I've been doing the Archive and the Espionage series. And it's just so funny that when I first started this podcast, there is no way I thought I would be doing either of those things, sort of running this chic fashion, huge media production, and then being out in a training facility in the wilderness, you know, interviewing spies in the wild. So another thing motherhood has really done to me is, instead of always planning my next big chapter and kind of reverse engineering it and thinking, I want to end up here, so I need to take these steps, it's been just flowing with the opportunities that come my way, because I don't have time to think more than 5 steps ahead. So when, you know, the most secret spy agency comes knocking on your door, you go, sure. Like, I don't know what that's going to look like. I've never done voice modification before. I've never been given security clearance, and I've definitely never heard a lot of the terminology or known a lot of the things that I've since been, you know, privileged to be able to explain to the general public. But here we are.
And it's so, sometimes when something shifts in you and you become a little more open to what's coming your way and still keeping an eye down the track, but also not so stringent or got your 5-year plan, that can be when these unexpected opportunities cross your desk, which is sounds like what's happening as part of this, you know, new chapter energy for you, Sarah.
Yeah. And I think each new chapter teaches you something about yourself as well. And I realized the common theme drawing all of these seemingly incongruous experiences together. For a little while there, I was like, is this my new chapter? Because they don't all connect. It doesn't translate into one nice bio line of what do I do? I still can't answer that question very easily. I don't have an elevator pitch that's like a nice title. But the common theme is storytelling. I really love to tell people's stories. I really love to listen to other people's stories. And even though I might now be doing that through so many different media, like CCA is but one platform, but other shows in other areas with other talent has, you know, again, accidentally become something that I do. And then doing it on site for the government. I mean, they are all linked together by stories about interesting humans. And that is such a privilege.
Well, before we wrap up, I wanted on that note to ask you about, I follow you on social media and I'm on Instagram. I'm not even on TikTok yet. So, you know, when it trickles down to Instagram, I'm there, you know, with all the, you know, upper millennials and Gen X. But I have noticed, Sarah, that you've really struck a chord with your audience and beyond with these hacks that you've been offering about public speaking. And I wanted to ask, has that surprised surprised you, and why do you think that is? Because I think that also speaks a bit to the moment that we're living in, that obviously if you're a professional public speaker, got it. But there's clearly so many people, women in particular, that their professional lives are now intersecting with the need to be speaking and presenting at that sort of scale. Is that what you think has accounted for the absolute runaway success and interest in this content? And is there a potential new business in this, for instance, with all your spare time?
I mean, you can really see over the last 18 months of Teddy how I've just rolled with wherever the interest is, both from me and from others, is where I'm going, which has been a really liberating, lovely way to be. I think it is that. I think that every person has become their own spokesperson. We are all doing a lot more public speaking or public facing content than we have ever done before, whether it's in business, whether it's within organizations. It's not just sort of journalists and speakers who are being required to go on camera. It is also the most universal, highest ranked fear we have as humans, public speaking. So I think seeing from someone who does it a lot and who enjoys it so much and doesn't shy away from it, anyone who is really scared of it or unfamiliar or new gets really excited, I think, by something that breaks it down to feel a little bit easier, or anything that appears like a hack that might help you overcome how uncomfortable it is. I think it's the fear and unfamiliarity that has driven people to resonate with the content. And what's been really interesting to me is that it's almost like how none of us really learn to run. One day you just start running when you're a kid, but you never actually know if you're doing it properly or if you're doing it efficiently. And I think that's the same with talking. Everyone thinks that if you've got a social media platform and you talk on camera, most of us just started doing it and there's no thought behind it. But because I started as a lawyer, I realized there is a lot of thought behind it because I was trained to do it. And suddenly I thought some of the psychology behind why I present the way that I do might be interesting to people, because all of that was around persuasiveness. As a lawyer, it's like, how can you be the most persuasive? As a speaker, it's how can you be the most impactful? So it's kind of the same thing. And I thought, if I could share more of that stuff, like what are lawyers told to be better in court, surely that applies to speakers who are trying to convince their audience about a product or a theme. And it was actually the Spy series, this accidental espionage conversation, that led me to realize, because I was thinking about firstly how I could get more interesting facts out of people who aren't used to sharing anything that they do at all, because it's the first time any of them have done podcasts. I realized I am sort of psychologizing. I know that's not the right word, but I am thinking a lot in the back of my head through an interview. But also for them, I was like, when they are also eliciting information from sources, which is one of the coolest parts of the interview, they do share a little bit of tradecraft. And I don't think the episodes will be out by the time this comes out, but they will be shortly after. And I cannot wait to share. There's so much in them. But they are also using techniques. And I've thought the more I can share that with people, there is no public speaking school. So maybe I could give them little bite-sized bits of public speaking school to kind of take on their way. And it's turned out people have found it useful.
They really have. There's a huge appetite for it, and we'll have a link to your social media handles in the show notes. So people do want to find out more about you. Sarah, my final question before we wrap up today is just thinking about the premise behind Seize the Yay and searching for the joy and the light in life. And again, not to sound glib, but I don't think I'm overstating it that a lot of people, as you and I are speaking in the final quarter of 2025, have found it's been a fairly harrowing year, certainly in the news cycle and globally. It's a time of year where people do start to feel a bit burnt out and depleted. At this point in your life and your career, what's your philosophy around seizing the yay, and what's your advice to people and yourself when it comes to how to seize the yay every day?
Oh, that's a great question and so easy to forget. I think it isn't a toxic positivity type mentality of, ignore the heaviness. Of course, we're not all meant to be happy all day, every day. And that's not what the messaging is of Seize the A as a brand. I'm not trying to tell everyone to ignore that there are really hard times being faced by so many people around the world. I think it's more that there are times where we can choose between seeing the lightness or the heaviness. And in those times where you do have control, that you never want to get to the end of your life and think you had less joy than you deserved, or that you enjoyed it less than you could have. And we do live in a society that is so focused on achievement, success, metrics like finances, promotions. And it's, especially as driven, ambitious people, it's really easy to get distracted by the shiny stuff. Am I successful? Am I being featured? Am I winning? Is my podcast on the chart? Like, there are so many other metrics that we turn to think, am I living a worthy life? And the question we forget often is, am I happy today? Or am I enjoying it? Not every minute, but globally, am I enjoying the things I can enjoy in my life? And that could be, am I enjoying my son? Or am I trying to rush off all the time to get to the next job? And I think it's just to remind yourself, ask. The way I often look at it is, we think about everything on the macro, the goals level, the titles level, but we often don't think day to day, will that make me happy? And at the very end, before we sold our business, it was the flashiest it had ever been. It was so successful. It was in 5,000 stores around the world. The revenue was about to like triple if we locked in this next big chapter. And on a macro level, it was like I could retire. On a micro day-to-day level, I had never hated it more. I resented every day that I had to go to the office. I was just my I was so detached from enjoyment and fulfillment that it was like, well, what's the point? What is the point of the macro without the micro? So I now am led a little bit more by, what are the small yays each day? And if they're not there, then really nothing is worth it. So that sees the A for me.
Oh, look, that is a perfect note on which to wrap up this conversation. And again, at the risk of using the word full circle again, I feel like it has brought a little bit full circle in terms of all of us evaluating our priorities and remembering whatever we're going through, the difficult, the complicated, the blissful, am I happy? And that's a great metric, I think, for all of us to live by. So, Sarah Davidson, you can find out more about Sarah on Instagram and TikTok. We'll have a link to her handle in the show notes. And, of course, you can tune in to Seize the A wherever you get your podcasts. And we will be keeping an eye out for the Spy series. And also from what you've said, Sarah, I think just starting to assess people I'm around now because, you know, they're walking among us. And
They are walking among us.
might be standing in line at the supermarket next to somebody that's working in intelligence and security. Sarah, thank you so much again for your time. Really lovely to chat to you again.
Thank you so much for having me. This was an absolute delight.